we have been doing a series covering Stargate Worlds, the ill-fated MMO that was in development in the late aughts. And we're going to do another one today that we've been really excited about. I'm privileged to see Katie Postma once again, lead community manager at Stargate Worlds, whom I replaced. And then she came back later after I left. But Howard Lyon, art director for Stargate Worlds. Hello, sir.
Hello.
It's
great to be here. Thank you for having me.
So good to see you. Your beard is beautiful, Howard. Where was this 20 years ago?
I know. Well, I had a little bit of hair 20 years ago, and so now I'm compensating for no hair, so I just grow the beard out.
It's glorious. It's absolutely glorious.
Thank you. Nature didn't give me much. This is about it. So
nature gave you what? I can't grow that.
It's giving me David Letterman, which is the dream, right? That's what you want to be.
Yeah, well, I like it. I think Zach Galifianakis referred to David Letterman as Matt Santa with his big beard. So
that's right. That's perfect.
Oh my God.
Perfect.
How are you, Howard?
I'm doing really
well. Busy as usual?
I am busy. Today is my anniversary.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So excited about that. Shari and I had been together since we were 15. We met in high school and started dating then. And it's just been
20 years later, here you are.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 20 small, short, 20, maybe not even that much, right? Yep. So here we are, and I'm a grandpa now.
You already are.
Yep. Have a little grandbaby, my daughter Belle, and she had a baby last year in June, and so we're coming up on the 1-year birthday of my granddaughter. So
isn't it the greatest?
It's the best thing ever. I can't believe it. It is so wonderful. I absolutely get. They say that grandkids make you live longer, and I get that. Like I want to experience all of life again now with my grandbaby.
Wow.
It's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, Howard, I moved in with mine, so I get it.
Amazing.
Yeah. I am thrilled to go through this with you, as is Katie. This is by no means going to be an exhaustive examination of Stargate Worlds art, though it may feel that way to the viewer. I spent the last 2 hours picking and choosing. I decided not to really get into the human stuff. We're going to look at the alien stuff and everything else.
Cool.
Where were you before Stargate, and how familiar were you with the franchise, and how did you get into Stargate Worlds?
I was very familiar with Stargate, and I loved the movie. I really loved the TV series as well. I went to school and studied illustration, and I thought I was going to come out of school and kind of follow in the footsteps of some of my heroes, Thomas Blackshear, Scott Gustafson, James Christensen, and go right into doing kind of limited edition prints and gallery work. But while I was at school, one of my teachers was the art director at a local video game company called Sapphire. And it looked like a good way to earn money while I was going to school. And I applied for the job and I managed to get it. And my first job was taking little black and white scans from the NFL Player's Handbook, which had like pictures of every NFL player in the league, and converting them to color. So basically tinting them and repainting them so they were like nice little pixel portraits of NFL football players. And I did that for a few months and then rolled into other video games. And I ended up doing that for like 12 years total in the video game industry. But I started at that company in 93, I believe.
Oh.
And then when my first child was born, Belle, who made me a grandpa, when she was born, we wanted to move back to Arizona. And so we picked up everything and moved back to Arizona, where all of our family was. Shari and I were going to school in Utah. Moved back to Arizona, and I started as an art director for a company called Cinematics. I worked for them for a while. And then I quit, and I started my own video game company, and we were making kids games, kind of educational games. And our goal was to make them the most beautiful games for kids that we could, to kind of take that Pixar mentality of, just because these are kids games doesn't mean they should be simple visually, and really tried to make something beautiful for them. And then 9/11 happened, and all the funding kind of dried up. We released 4 titles in a pretty quick succession, and one of them was named Game of the Year by Disney's Family Fun magazine. So that was a cool kind of accolade for our little company.
Which one was that?
It's called Professor Fogg's Workshop, and the game that we made, the one that was called Wizmo's Workshop. And I think my kids played that. That's cool. That's really cool.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun. We had a blast. And it was at Cinematics that I met Carl Koss, who was the lead animator on Stargate Worlds, and he came with me to Professor Fogg's Workshop. So he was one of the principal people at Professor Fogg's Workshop. Then, like I said, 9/11 happened, and our company, we decided at that point we were in the black, and we decided to close our doors and not just kind of struggle along, trying to find funding. And one of the reasons that we felt we could do that is there was another company in town that wanted us, the members of the team, to come work for him. And that was a company called Realm Interactive. And they were making a game called Exarch. And Joe Mad, the comic book artist, was kind of the creative lead on that project. And we got the attention of NCSoft, and NCSoft ended up buying the company and moving them to Austin, Texas. And I decided I am done with video games. Decided it was time for me to move on in my career and do freelance illustration. Made that career move and was very happy doing so. And one of the reasons that I did is because I was working 80 hours a week in the video game industry. And I was missing my 3 young kids growing up. I would leave for work and kiss them goodbye, but by the time I got home, they were often in bed. And we realized it just wasn't sustainable. That's not what I wanted out of life. And so switch over to freelance illustration. And we'd been doing that for several years. Doing work for Dungeons and Dragons and various magazines and book covers, and started doing work for Magic the Gathering. And then I heard about this startup in town, Cheyenne Mountain Entertainment, and I had some friends that were interested and were telling me about it. And someone reached out to me, and I can't remember who it was.
I think it was Dan.
Asked me to do, it might have been Dan initially, but I'm not sure if it was. Certainly I met with Dan. If it wasn't Dan right away, it was very shortly after. And they wanted me to do some concept art for the game. And I was very familiar with Stargate, and they had me illustrate this scene of kind of this interior of a temple. Yep. And Dan was like, we would like to hire you. And I said, I don't want to. I will never do crunch time again. I said, the video game industry has just taken too much of a toll on me and my family, as much as I love it. And I said, I'll just work as a freelance artist if you are interested in having me do that. And then they commissioned me to do this kind of establishing shot for the world. And it was like this vertical poster that was in the background of Dan's video. And it had the Jaffa in the corner and kind of view of the sprawling city. And then Dan said, we're going to hire you. And And so I met with him. I talked with him for a while, and I said, Dan, I know how these projects go. I said, the only way I would do it is if I will work 40 hours a week doing the job. And he said, okay, let's bring you in. And so I talked with my wife, and we talked about kind of the pros and cons of, jumping back into this industry again, and decided to go for it. So, in one of the conditions was that I needed Carl to come on as animator as well. At least I hope I'm remembering that right. I know that's what I was thinking. Like, I don't want to do this if Carl isn't there heading up animation. So,
wow, that was a good get to.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Cool is that?
Yeah, I know. Carl's amazing. I knew that animation was going to be a big and difficult part of the whole project, and I knew that if Carl was involved, as art director, I really wouldn't have to think about it.
Didn't have to worry about him. Did they keep their promise all the way through the run, keeping it 40 hours a week?
Dan kept his side of it, but I didn't keep my side of it. There were definitely times where I would work longer hours, but it's hard when you come to love your team and you love the people that are working, and they're working really hard, to just say good night.
Good night. You can't do it.
I'm going home. So but I did my best, because I promised Shari, that was going to be the case. Anyone who's worked in the video game industry for very long has been through crunch times, and they've probably even been through times where you're asked to go without a paycheck. And we had been through that at 2 different companies. And maybe this will come into the story a little bit later as we talk about this, but it was something that I just told my wife I wouldn't do anymore. Because I had established this career working as an illustrator and artist, and it just was a source of too much stress in her life to try and do that anymore. But Cheyenne Mountain,
especially when your kids are young, right?
Yeah, just babies. I mean, my youngest was born in March of 2001, and so
they were really young.
Yeah, just really just
just starting
babies.
School.
So yeah.
So
I needed to be there. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I am thrilled to jump into some of this with you here.
Cool.
Is there anything that we should set up before we start looking at the art? Is there anything that you want to say?
The Cheyenne Mountain art team was this really beautiful mix of people who this was their first job in the industry, and of veterans that had some real experience. And I think one of the things that amazed me was how skilled our newbies were. How skilled this crew that came in just right out of school and just kind of blew me away. I expected people like Nick and Carl and people who had worked in the industry to know what they were doing and do their work and do a great job. But man, we had a lot because Arizona really wasn't a hub for the video game industry. It was always a challenge to recruit and get people in. And we recruited heavily from schools. And boy, did we get lucky with the people that we got. I think of like Chi and RC and
let's get some last names in here. So Nick,
Chi Fong and RC Torres and Nick Heitzman.
Nick is Lamartine.
Nick Heitzman.
Yeah, Nick Heitzman.
Yeah, that's right.
Nick was a veteran of the industry and
that's right.
Worked, if I'm remembering right, as lead on the project, lead artist. And man, he was such a strong foundation for the team as well. But people like Chi Fong and RC Torres and I hate that I'm not going to remember everybody. It's been a little while.
We're not going to remember everyone.
But they just worked so hard and did such great work for the project. I love that team. We did some amazing things with it.
We have a list,
Right.
so if there's anyone you can't remember, we can
good.
find them for you.
Excellent.
We're
Thank
working
you.
to build it all back together
We've been
on our
working
end
on it.
here.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'd like to start off with landscapes, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
that's great, because that's really where that was my first job on the game, was to create these establishing shots. I mean, that's what I did kind of with that temple shot in the poster. And so one of the challenges, as you know, working on these games, where they're a really big game, where we're going to have outsourcing, we're going to have a large team of artists, is you don't want it to look like you have a large team of artists. You don't want it to look like you are outsourcing to a lot of people to create the assets for the game. You want to make it look like one person did everything, so that it's uniform, it has harmony, and that was our goal. And one of the ways that I knew we could try and achieve that was to create these big establishing shots, where, maybe it's the shot of Agnos in it, and it has all of the architecture, and it has the style of the computer display, it has the doors, it has the walls, it has what the sky looks like, that shows you the ambient light and all of those sorts of things. And so I would go through, before we would start developing an area, and do these big paintings that were establishing shots, and then we would break them out and take all of, we could examine the image for all of these different assets, and I felt like that was critical to having a visual harmony in the game, is having these big establishing shots. So, and I loved it. I loved doing these paintings. They were really a blast to do.
You're establishing the world. It's not necessarily like what you'd see coming through the Stargate, like your first image of it. In some cases, perhaps, but it's sweeping. For memory, I've organized them chronologically based on how I remember you creating them.
Okay.
I'd like to start off with Tollana.
Yeah.
So this is Tollana. Obviously, the fans are going to be like, why isn't it destroyed? Well, the Goa'uld built it back up, right?
Yeah, you remember, of course you do. You remember a lot more lore than I do, for sure. At this point, I would just have my head down trying to create these shots as fast as I could, going through the game. But I do think don't we have a destroyed version as well?
We do indeed.
Not to get ahead. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. These were a blast to do. I can't remember what software I was using, but I was building out kind of these base models, and then going in and painting on top of them to create our assets. Oh, such a fun project.
So pretty. Your use of color is just extraordinary. And your highlights and shadows, the light and the dark. I mean, look, we've got action happening here. The debris.
Yeah.
We're catching it mid-collision, whatever this is.
We were trying definitely to, in these shots, to even show maybe some of the effects that we would need to generate for the levels. And so that's why I was trying to put some of that in there. So,
how long would a composition like this take? Soup to nuts.
If I'm remembering right, we would work with Chris Klug and Creative, and they would kind of give us a brief as to what the world needed to be and contain, and we'd have those meetings, and then I would do some kind of little sketches for them, very similar to how I would start an illustration for a book cover, and we'd talk those over, and then kind of really hit the ground running. And I think most of them took around 10 to 14 days to produce. So not super fast, not super long, kind of in that mid-range. Of course, I was doing that while we were, creating textures and models and building up assets for it as well. So I think if I were just sitting down to do it, they'd be about a week's worth of full-time work on the project. But
do you feel as an artist, you've evolved from this? Do you look at this and see, oh my God, are you pulling it apart on the inside? I'm curious.
No, I actually, those landscape shots, most of them, I still feel really proud about the work. There is a lot of work from, those years of my life, a decade and a half ago, that I look at and I kind of go, ooh, I really could I could do better work now, which is where you want to be. You want to feel like you're moving forward and progressing. For instance, in these, the big crystals make me laugh a little bit. They feel a little cliche. And I think that was the response actually from creative. We didn't actually end up putting them in like that, and it needed a lore justification in the game as well. And we were just kind of throwing noodles at the wall, so to speak, and seeing what would stick. And so not everything we did, even from these shots.
I remember this gal had a name. I can't remember what it is though. It's not Travell, folks. It's someone else from Tolan history. But
nice.
The lore was just so thoughtful and built out. It's amazing how Simon Fraser University becomes this whole alien planet. I mean, it's been everything from Caprica to Tolan to all kinds of places. But this is one of my favorite pieces that you did.
Well, thank you.
And I remember having the conversation with Chris. I mean, I don't recall seeing crystals on Tollana, and it's like, well, we've got to take this in new directions, and
sure.
you're gonna see things that you've not seen before,
right?
And that was modulating the expectations for fandom, and Katie can agree with me on this till the cows come home, that well, it didn't XYZ, and the answer is always, how do you know? Did you see the whole planet? So we start here on the TV show, and then we work our way out.
Yes. And that's one of the pullback. Yeah, it's this new media, new format for the intellectual property affords you that opportunity, and you don't have the budget constraints of a video game impact the development differently than budget constraints of a television show.
For sure.
I can make a 1,000-story tall building for a video game. That's a lot harder to do, on a practical set. So
we can travel to planets that don't look like Vancouverland.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, right? Everything can be full of flowing magma and explosions and big effects, and it costs us very little on the video game. So
yeah.
I remember creating your featurette, which I will put at the end of this video, the one-on-one that I did with you. And amazing. At that time, you were creating the castle.
This is one of my favorite pieces that I did for it. Maybe there's a few too many little jagged points in there, noise-wise, but I still really love this piece. To me, this embodied what makes Stargate very special for me, to come to these just extraordinary views. I can imagine myself stepping through that gate and seeing the castle and seeing this, terribly hostile landscape where it looks like fangs and teeth are growing out of the ground. And the shift, that one of the things that I loved with this illustration is the kind of subtle temperature shift from the very cool blues to the slightly a little more green yellow blues around the castle, and then to get that punch of the complementary color of the oranges and peaches coming out of the sky. It hit a lot of marks for me. I'm still really proud of this piece.
Absolutely beautiful.
Awesome. It's awesome.
Thank you. I have a question for you, and maybe this is too wonky, but who owns these assets now?
David.
Technically MGM would.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it would revert to the rights holder. So for sure.
Right.
Because it's got Stargates in it, so good luck. I've got a few of them for sure.
It's way more fun to say David, though. Way more
yeah,
fun.
Sure, right.
He's the keeper of all things.
The guys in the black pajamas are going to jump me at night, so don't please. So.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons I asked is every once in a while I have someone reach out about Stargate. It's not frequent, but every once in a while there is. And I've had people ask me if I could send them the assets from the game, which is kind of an odd request. And I haven't, because I've said I don't own them. These aren't mine.
Right. But, they want to resurrect it somehow.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I mean, it's so easy to turn around and sell. And you don't know where this stuff is going once it's out the door, so you got to be careful.
That's right.
I love Agnos. I loved the concept that Christopher had for the AI that was there. We'll talk about a little bit about that with Sean and Steve soon. It's not Sean Dugan and Steve Garvin.
Cool.
Anything more about this piece? That I just love this landscape, man. There are puddle jumpers in there, not in this shot, but they're there.
Nice. It was so fun to, so you have, I think they call it the Giant's Causeway in Ireland, the kind of those big basalt
The
crisp,
pillars.
that formed like that. And that was definitely something that we were obviously looking at. And then looking at like bismuth, that mineral, and imagining a landscape that was very hostile again, but very beautiful. I remember there was a lot of discussion over that, and the formation in the sky. Was it a galaxy? Because that doesn't make sense for what we were doing in Stargate. Was it a nebula? Could they be that close and have it be visible? And I remember there was quite a bit of discussion around that, which every time I was like sitting in the chair just thinking, yeah, but it's really pretty. It was like,
thing.
That's not my job. You guys, you can figure out whether it works or not. But I just thought, oh, this is really beautiful in the sky. And ultimately, I think they found some good rationale for including that and having that in there, because it was an asset that we added to the skybox.
It's beautiful.
That's a very Star Trek question, right? Is this technically sound? Is it scientifically valid?
Right.
And I think one of the things I love about Stargate is that they do try whenever possible to find the science behind it or find the reality behind it to give it that justification.
Yeah.
Hang it on something.
Right.
Well, it just makes it more relevant. Like Star Wars is an escape, but there's nothing that's scientifically accurate anywhere in it.
It's Space Wizards.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's just a Western, but I love that. I love that Stargate leaned into that more than going the other direction. I really do.
I agree. It's easy to just kind of be like, yeah, but this isn't real, so we can do whatever we want. But I think that it is owed to the intelligence of the fans to not just dismiss.
That's right.
Reality completely, because it makes it relatable when you have some of that foundation in there. So that is important.
I have
it's far more satisfactory.
Yeah.
I've got something I've been meaning to ask you for a long time, and it's perfectly fine for you to crush my spirit here. This was obviously after 9/11. The holes in the New York skyline were still very prominent for us, and at this point, before they figured out the migratory problems that it would cause, the beams of light were shooting out of the sky in New York certain nights. And I remember thinking to myself, Atlantis, the time period that we've seen Atlantis was described as the crown jewel of the ancient domain. And the only time that we really see it is during at the end of its 100-year war, when they've lost, and now when we're trying to hide from them. But when the Wraith weren't a problem, I always imagine the city lighting up like a beacon in the dark. And so I remembered bringing that note to one of the art meetings and saying, like, the towers should have these streams of light shooting out of them.
Yeah.
And this is in this shot here. Is that my note, Howard, or were you going to do that anyway?
That is... Ooh, I wanted to just immediately say that's absolutely you, David. It may be. I do not remember. I wish I remembered that specific note. But I will say, your input was absolutely highly regarded. Your expertise in Stargate, in the universe, that we did not take your input lightly at all. So if that was something that you had brought to the table, I absolutely, to me, is not unlikely that's where that came from. So
It's the one note that I remember giving.
I told you not to tell him, Howard. There'll be no living with him now. No, I remember. Chris said the same thing. That's why he established that weekly with you, because it was important. You were their check-in for the fans of the show, for the lore. That's very cool. The lighting's beautiful on that. Good note, David.
Love
Thank
it.
you. Now check this one out. You want to talk about some lighting? Anima Vitrus.
Yeah. I love painting trees. I love painting nature. This piece was such a delight. Yeah. Now this painting was like 3 weeks. This was not a fast painting to do, but I did have some of the benefit of, by the time we did this, we had some of these assets built out, the buildings that were there. And so I remember I utilized that to help me do it a little bit faster.
Oh, so you'd take it and fill in with the stuff
Yeah,
that had
so
been
I'd like
established?
take
That's
that,
really cool.
take that building and render it out and then drop
It's
it in
kind of the
Photoshop.
opposite, right, of what you assume concept art is.
Yeah.
But what a great marriage between, what's going in that you can
Right.
just kind of put into
Yeah,
it.
we had some of
wonderful.
those buildings built, so I took them in
That's
and
great.
helped me speed up the process. But oh man,
The rainbow. That is insane. How do you achieve that?
Yeah,
He can't tell you that's job insurance.
Sure, yeah, that's right. That's right, man. Some of these things are just good digital tools, right? That help things go quite fast.
Yeah, you said you couldn't remember. I remember, just because I'm the community manager, I don't do art and I don't do tech at all, but I remember Maya being a big word thrown around in the halls. Was that what the animators were using?
No, we were using 3D Studio Max.
Okay.
To do a lot of the work in, and that's kind of what Carl and I were really familiar with and had worked with a lot, and
okay,
that's what we kind of pushed onto the team. Maya is a wonderful program as well. We just didn't have as much familiarity with it.
The human really puts things to perspective, so to speak.
Yeah, the tiny little figures in there, these giant plants. This is the world I want to live in. Right. I want to live in the world with these massive plants and trees
but I love how, you can look at the earlier one with the castle that's so cold and so remote, and you can really feel, and then this one you're like, oh, I feel warm again and cozy.
Yeah.
It's just as inviting, despite the soldiers in the forest coming for you. But yeah, it's quite the juxtaposition going from world to world and never knowing what you're going to get.
I have all my pencil sketches for these somewhere. I need to dig them out.
Yes, please.
Like the onion skin sketches.
Yeah. See where all the traditional work is for this, because we did a lot of digital. We did a lot of traditional work for it too.
Right on. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, if you ever find it, you have to scan and send to David, or
absolutely
it all up and mail.
We'll have you back on. This is not going to be the only time. Let's look at Akhet. I don't know if this was going to be the final world, but it was going to be pretty close, because you want to talk about the backstory behind this design here and how you guys grew out of that with the trailer and how you guys incorporated it into. Do you remember those details?
You know what? This is kind of a funny thing. I can't remember if this came after the logo design or before it. But I'm
pretty sure you guys integrated it into this.
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering right, we had been working on the logo for the game, and we ended up tying that design into this one for the level. But I'm trying to remember that exact time frame. This was one of the last kind of establishing shots that I did, if I'm remembering it right. And
was it
this
because of the timing of the story that was being revealed, do you think? Or
yeah, I think so.
It's definitely later in the story.
Yeah. And this was a very quick illustration. This was, I remember we banged this out pretty fast, and it went part of the reason it went fairly fast is because it's mostly symmetrical, and then kind of introduce some asymmetry to it. But to do a little bit different palette. If I'm remembering right, the shapes in the sky are because it was under kind of this protective pyramid, force fields that was around the whole area. That's what that shape in the sky is for.
But to
Certainly
have
very foreboding and ominous place to come.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you've got a star system that has orbital bodies that are locked in place. I mean, that's some pretty raw power.
Yeah.
Always intimidated looking at this thing for sure. But a beautiful
it's cool
piece,
to
man.
see the familiar logo in a different way, and yet it's really like familiar. When you see it, you're like, oh, that's so
See that where that came from and how that was.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I don't know where this one fits.
So this one, I think this might be by Emma.
Okay.
Emma Huang, who did this piece. Yeah. So this one isn't my piece, and there was a planet. I also did one for this world, and it was the very last establishing shot that I did. The one for that world. It's kind of the volcanic scene. But I don't remember the name of the world. I don't remember.
Is it? It's probably. I remember. It's Tartarus. I think you did Tartarus.
Yeah.
There is so much art that there is to go through. We're obviously not going to be able to see everything. I do want to start off with something that's really close to the hearts of fans, and that is the Asgard.
Yeah.
Hi, buddy.
Our buddies. That's right.
Yeah.
We didn't get to have a lot of content for them realized in the game beyond the art. There wasn't that much created. They were kind of left off further down the line. Is that right?
Yeah. That we had started to kind of work on and develop kind of how they would function in the world. They were going to have like these little drones that were with them that you could upgrade the drone as you upgraded your character, and the physicality of them was obviously going to be different than the Jaffa and the humans, and how they'd be integrated. So I think this was by Emma as well. This illustration.
It's so good.
It's so cool.
It was, from as a fan to see these characters get developed in the game, but also kind of tying into our own world history lore of Greys, and that was very appealing. So, Emma did a lot of work on the Asgard. Eric did too, of course, because Eric did a lot of work on everything because he produced so much work. Holy cow!
Yeah, huge body of work that these guys did.
Yeah. One of the things that I did when I got hired is Dan had an office for me, and I knew that that didn't sound like very much fun to sit in an office while I had this whole team of great creative people working out on the floor.
You
and
had
so
that kind of bullpen of all the artists outside your office.
Right. So I think the first week I moved out of the office onto the floor so they could be right there with all of the artists. And I'm so glad that I did, because it allowed me to build those relationships, not just to be present on the floor, but also build relationships with the team. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I couldn't imagine you not being in the thick of it.
Yeah, that sounds
your
boring.
office, or what was supposed to be your office, was the very first place I ever saw a scorpion.
Oh, wow.
It was before your time. I went in there, and whoever was in there said, "Do you want to see something cool?" and lifted up the garbage can in the corner, and there were a couple, those little teeny tiny ones.
Yeah.
The babies, they're the most venomous.
That's right. The scary
one. Howard, did you guys ever get bit?
Never did get stung.
Me either.
had a cousin and a nephew that both got stung multiple times. My mom
Yikes.
got stung by a scorpion growing,
The little ones,
before it was a
Babies
little
can't
one.
control how much venom they release, so they're the
they're
worst.
so scary. Yeah, that's right. Well,
Yeah.
I heard the smaller things are the more deadly they are.
That's right, because they don't control. They don't have the ability to control, and they look just like they look pure evil. So,
Scorpions are nasty. The house that I lived in while I was working on this game, the backyard had hundreds and hundreds of scorpions, and so
Wow.
we'd go out at night with a black light, and the scorpions glow green under UV light, and
Cool.
so you can see them from 30 feet away, and we'd go out and clean them up.
That's
get
cool.
them out there. Yeah.
absolutely. Did the tortoise ever eat them?
Tortoise didn't, but our chickens did. So we'd collect the
chickens did.
scorpions and toss
Okay.
them in with the chickens, and they would just snap them up.
What was the
Perfect.
name of your tortoise?
Quickie.
Quickie. That's
Of
right.
course it was.
Yep, Quickie was an African spur thigh, and when we bought him, he was about the size of a walnut. And
Aw.
by the time we had to sell him because he was destroying our block fence, because he would dig underneath the fence. It was almost like a challenge. Anything that was fixed to the ground, he wanted to bulldoze and kind
Wow.
of dig through. But by the time we sold him, he was over 150 pounds. He
My
was,
And he'll outlive us.
yeah. He was such
Isn't
a cool beast.
Isn't that
He got
wild?
sold off to, in the words of the buyer, to be a stud on a turtle farm. So
Oh, good.
outliving
Joy for
his
him.
life. Yeah.
That's great. This poor Asgard, though.
Oh my goodness.
Speaking of studs, is what you're
Wow.
supposed to say, David.
That's it.
Yeah, that's right. I do not I did not recall that until you brought it up. Yeah, that's
Wow.
wild. I don't remember the rationale behind that concept, what we were doing there.
Something radically different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yikes.
cool. That
Yeah,
looks
very
like
cool.
Eric's work, Eric Belial.
Evil.
And then this is this said magazine cover, I think.
So this isn't the final. This is one of the concepts that we did. I can't remember what magazine it was, but we were asked to do some work that would go on the cover. And so there's a finished version of this illustration out there, but
Oh.
Eric did the initial conceptual work for it. And then I think Eric and I both worked on the final. I know I worked on the final, but I think that Eric was right there working on it too. Which,
Okay.
when I went to Tokyo for a Magic the Gathering event,
You saw him?
I saw Eric. Yeah, we got lunch and spent some time
Yeah, he's
together.
over there.
Yeah.
Right on.
His stuff is
Aw.
just extraordinary. We'll be
Such
looking
a
at some of it
sweetie.
here for sure. The drones.
You know what? One of the things that Eric brought to the table that was so powerful is he thought about motion so much. He thought about the animation and how the mechanics of how they would function. And he had some real ability in After Effects. And so Eric would take these illustrations and turn them into little animations. And it was such a powerful way to show these concepts. So a lot of these he ended up just dropping in like over lunch and turning them into
Wow.
this beautiful little animation that kind of blew my mind. After Effects always felt a little like witchcraft to me, something that, just a program that I never had the requirement to learn. And so watching Eric take these and do what he did was really exciting. But he just has such a great mind for mechanical things like this. And these progressions of the leveling up of the drones, I absolutely love. I think this would have been such a fun aspect of the game to upgrade as an Asgard, to upgrade these little drones, have them flying around you. And I can't remember for sure, but there was like one that had a science focus, one that was a little more
This
aggressive.
is the science focus. The one before it was offensive. And then this one is defensive. So yeah, they each had their own color scheme and purpose.
Right. Oh, so cool. I think these are just really brilliant designs that he came up with.
Now you're working with portals. Seeing a little GLaDOS influence in there.
Yeah, Eric was someone who came into the project a little bit later on. He wasn't there when I got there, came in a little bit later on, and man, we were sure lucky lucky to get him. I think he came from Ubisoft up in Canada, and he quickly just had a huge impact on the project.
One of the things that Chris talked about was Christopher Klug talked about when he came on was this this French artist mindset that worked its way into the art design that he admits that he and his team had like nothing to do with. Like this, all of a sudden there it was, and it was like that's it. That's the direction that we're going to take the new Mind Goa'uld.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that?
Well, just Eric. I mean, Eric was such a powerhouse with his ideas, and he presented them in such a compelling way. Like I said, not just with these static concepts, but he would put together little animations for some of them to drive home, like this is what it is going to look like in the game. And they were so compelling. It was even if you wanted to say no, it was very hard to do so, because it's like, yeah, that is extremely cool. And so his impact on the game grew and grew to the point where, it went from me art directing to me collaborating to me just saying, do your thing, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look at that emblem incorporated there. And yes, Chris talking about how like the Jean-Paul Gaultier and, some of that kind of fashion design, and Eric was pretty keyed in on that and very good at taking that and applying it to, video game characters, where he's bringing kind of this sci-fi couture that I don't think anyone else on the team was capable of doing that. He was perfect for it. So, yeah, look at those great designs. And then you can see how he's like pulling out the assets so that those could be handed off to the team. That articulated armor on the arm and leg and boots, I love that.
It reminds me of Borg combined with Minas Tirith. It's just
sure. And look at those. Look at the faces on the shoulder plates on that.
But you can imagine it actually, them closing and opening it, and it kind of coming out like do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Carl
like
and
retractable.
Shad Bradbury and Irene and
Irene.
Eric Johnson would have gone nuts with some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the animation crew was wonderful. Irene was such a talented, not to switch gears, but on
she
Dan's
still is
segment, but on Dad's segment showed that sculpture that Irene created. I mean, she's in, and I believe that is what she's doing primarily now, is creating, doing sculptures. I could be wrong there, but
she was with Pixar, I think, for all of them. Almost all of them went to Pixar sooner or later, and then not all of them are there anymore. But it's they figured out what they wanted. So
phenomenally skilled artists that were working in the animation group. No,
what we're seeing here is different armor sets for the male and female of each race at different tier levels. So for the lay in the audience who's never touched a MMO, what's going on for progression?
So what? Clarify that a little bit, David. You mean why? Like
why is it getting more things getting more increasing in complexity?
Oh yeah.
Well, like when you start the game, and this is common to a lot of MMOs, it's common to a lot of video games. You don't get to hold Excalibur right out of the gate. You usually start with like a little wooden sword or something like that, and you slowly progress. And one of the challenges with Gold was they're already advanced. They're already, it's not like you're starting out as a peasant who eventually saves the world. Mm-hmm. But so we wanted some sophistication to their fashion and to their look and design, and then go from there and amplify it and add to it to make it more and more complex. it's always a real challenge. If you start out of the gate, no pun with Stargate there. If you start out of the gate with a very high fashion, and then you need to take it even further. But Eric was capable of doing that.
Oh, it's just nuts. Absolutely. Now, story-wise, it's the end of season 8. The Goa'uld that we know have been defeated, and so they had to, from a story perspective, create a new branch of them that had not been discovered. And so that's why they, had the excuse and the blessing from Brad to just, hey, go in this direction here.
Yeah.
This reminds me so much of Mystique.
What cool silhouettes that were created with these concepts. I love that. Like, look at the boots. Just very different lines that are created, and then kind of the bulkiness of the jacket, the blazer that character is wearing, and often throughout history, through military history, that silhouette is very important. Get the broad shoulders and the epaulets, and you think of like Napoleon's hat, and kind of that sweeping shape. And I know that at least if I'm remembering right, Eric was looking at military uniforms and then taking them and adding kind of this fashion sense to them.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that.
They're going to clean up with style.
Yeah.
Oh man, look at that.
Really beautiful designs.
There's a couple of these I've never seen. Man.
Look at that. What a cool... See, this would have been an amazing cosplay for someone to put together. So in these, I look at some of these.
They all would have been.
Yeah, they all would have been really fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, like on any video game, time is money. And Eric was producing these so fast. Sometimes these would be like 1 to 2 days of work to put out some of these concepts. I mean, there's file after file after file of these, and breaking them out. So he was working at a breakneck pace.
Some people might have probably felt like they were standing still next to him. It'd be a little bit intimidating if you're not, really all that sure of yourself.
Yeah.
Some, did you have people who really had this, it felt like they had this imposter syndrome that you had to assure, hey, you're here for a reason?
You know what?
How much of your position was like as a teacher and as a bit of a counselor?
We had, like I said before, we had a lot of people right out of school, but I feel like those that were veterans were grateful for people like Eric that were producing so quickly, and those that were new were also grateful because they were learning. They were able to see someone that was doing this incredible body of work and contributing to the game. Well, that's a killer design.
Man,
that's
neck armor.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah, I love that Eric in his designs was very, often you get the games where the man is in the full plate armor and the woman has like
a bikini.
Yeah, like a bikini and very exposed. And Eric,
it's the same rating though. It's like, but
right. Yeah, right. The armor somehow functions the same, but Eric was very good about creating these armor sets that were applied regardless of gender in the same way, but making them so real. That they felt very feminine, very masculine at the same time, or androgynous. That I think was just beautifully done. Yeah, look at that. That's cool.
Yeah, very.
Yeah. What a fun trip down memory lane.
Mm-hmm.
When you look back on this project, is it equal parts satisfaction and sadness? Because I can tell you right now, Howard, I never would have thought, 20 years ago that all of this work that you guys created was essentially being created for my channel. In some respects, that's like, to archive it, that's really bizarre.
Right. Sure.
That our audience, our group, were really the ones who got to appreciate it. The creators and Katie and myself and the others in the marketing team.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel?
I have such mixed feelings over it, over the game. Overwhelmingly of joy and great memories because of the people that I worked with on it, and I'm very proud of the work that was done for it. I think the part that makes me sad is that it didn't have to happen that way.
Okay.
The game should have been released. The pieces were in place. The hard work was done. Everything was there.
We were right there.
And yeah, we were just right on the edge of being able to do this and make this project happen. And seeing how hard people worked, seeing how hard the team worked on it. As I said at the very beginning, and I told Dan I would not do crunch time and I wasn't going to work 80 hours a week on the game. And for the most part, I held to that. But a lot of the team made a lot of sacrifices and worked very long hours. And I admire the team so much and the work that they did on this. It would just Scott, our technical artist, did so much heavy lifting on the game.
Oh my gosh, Scott Hill.
Yeah. Jacob, who did so much work
Johnson.
and grew so much on the project. And,
Yeah.
I just think about the work that everyone did, and Ron Bravo, who was like working hard, kind of feed in both the technical area and then on the art side as well. And I don't use the word deserved. That's not the right word, but man, I wish that this would have been released for everyone and the hard work that they did on the
That's right.
game. Like I said, it didn't need to, it should have happened, I don't know how much. I know you've talked a little bit about it in the previous interviews, but there was
we're talking about what everyone is willing to talk about.
Yeah, just kind of that mismanagement of the hard-earned resources, the money and the financing, and I wasn't in the meetings where decisions were made, and honestly, from what I understand, our good friends that did their best to make this project happen, they weren't necessarily in those meetings either, where the decisions were made, where money that was supposed to go to this game went other places. And David, I don't know if this should be in this video or not, but about a year after I left, the IRS knocked on my door.
No.
And they showed their badges. They were from the criminal division of the IRS.
Oh.
And I opened the door, and there's two agents on my doorstep, and they showed their badges, and they said, "Are you Howard Lyon?" And I am. And they said, "We'd like to talk to you. As far as we know, you've done nothing wrong." And
my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think they quickly could tell that I was just this,
that you're not a criminal mastermind.
Dumb artist working on the game. Yeah. But they did. They
No.
interviewed me and asked me about the project and the people that I worked with, and that was quite the experience.
That's
Something
so
that I never
unfortunate. Wow.
Yeah. So
Oh my goodness.
I honestly don't know what that means for, people involved with securing financing for the game and that sort of thing. But
It's just disappointing.
yeah,
It feels like for the timing that was at the stage where there was some recoup happening, like desks and
I
chairs
suspect.
and
yeah,
Yeah,
so
itemizing.
it could have been kind of part of that, like, let's see what he's got, maybe, right? Because they were
Right.
just trying any way they could to kind of claw back whatever to try to give some satisfaction to anybody who was, who felt the pain of that mismanagement that was outside the team,
right.
is
You
the
know,
best
they-
way to say it.
They recruited money heavily from the local community there.
For sure.
And
Yeah,
I had
friends
a-
and
Yes.
family and associates.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So I had a few people that approached me and said, "Whoa, this looks like it's going to make a lot of money." And
Yeah.
my response to them was, "Don't do it." even though I was
Really?
working on the game. Yeah, I said, don't do it. Not because I didn't believe in Stargate Worlds, but because I had worked in the video game industry for quite a while. And I knew how difficult it was to make a successful game that paid money out.
And
You
you
know,
care about your relationships
That's
with those
right.
people. If it's a stranger, it's very different than if it's, your Aunt
yeah,
Linda who's
yeah,
going to be able to now never talk to you again at Thanksgiving.
right.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
Right.
they still did. They still put money in. So I'd have them come to me every once in a while. They're like, how's it going? How's it going on the game?
Yeah.
And
Aw.
want to give updates and want to do my best to make it good. But
Ugh. It
yeah,
breaks my heart because, like you said, I know you said deserving's not a good word, but so many people, it would have just been so gratifying to see them get the credit and recognition they
yes,
They
deserved.
deserved.
Like
Yeah.
we won, there was something, wasn't there something at E3, some piece of art that we won an award at E3? I thought it was a concept piece. In the hall when you're coming out of E3, there's that big long hall and they have all these pieces of art. I thought there was
yeah.
something that we submitted that won.
I don't
Anyway.
remember. I do remember E3 was what a fun experience that was. And I do remember showing up at E3 and we were standing there, a group of the artists, and I was with some of my friends that I had worked with at previous
Yeah,
companies,
yeah,
and a bus drove by with Stargate Worlds
yep,
art on it. And it was like, whoa, that's
yep,
crazy. And then one of the buildings had the Stargate
yes.
art on the whole
Yeah,
Was
in
that
side.
E3
Figueroa.
or San Diego Comic Con?
Yeah, oh
No,
yes, this was yeah, that was at Comic Con. You're right.
Comic-Con, yeah.
Yeah, not
But
E3,
at
but at
E3 there
Comic Con.
was, I thought, no, there was at E3, when
Mm,
you're walking up Figueroa from the Staples Center, I don't know what it's called now.
yeah,
There
yeah,
was a banner on one of the buildings as well. I'm
very
pretty
cool.
sure.
Yeah, yeah, that was a great experience.
It was surreal. Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
wild
getting to
stuff,
have
man.
lunch with Richard Dean Anderson and then doing that panel was a blast.
That was Comic-Con. Yeah.
Yeah, at Comic Con.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What year did
amazing.
we
Yeah.
decide that was, David? Was that 8 or 9?
It's
8.
08. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah, for
wait,
sure. No,
please.
yeah, because Universe came out at 9. But what do you remember about being on
Wow.
stage in Ballroom 20 in front of 4,500 people?
That
Sitting
was
with Brad.
yeah, that was nuts. That was nuts sitting there and feeling like the least qualified person to be on the stage with everybody, as they were talking about the
It's
lore,
it's funny
everything.
because Chris and Dan say the same thing. Like everybody that's up there says the same thing,
Yeah.
but you were
The
all there for a really good reason.
I remember one thing, and I had a good line at Comic Con that made me happy. Someone, when it came to the question and answer point, someone asked the question, are you worried about being compared to World of Warcraft that then had 12 million concurrent players? And I said, World of Warcraft can have their 12 million players because we will take the 40 million Stargate fans any day. And
Beautiful.
and the crowd was like, oh, because there
Yeah,
was a lot of
beautiful.
Stargate people in there. And um, I was like, oh my gosh, I hope I just didn't embarrass myself or, say something like that.
Fantastic.
That's a
But
great
that felt
response.
good. It felt good in the group of
Perfect.
people because it was
Because
true. Because
and
every
that's where
week,
we were drawing all our fans. We weren't
yeah,
taking them from WoW. We weren't going into,
Mm-mm.
into heroes and versus villains or anything. We were taking them from anywhere. I mean, that's how I met David, was finding the fandom, at
That's
yeah,
right.
every corner of the planet. And David
right,
was like the glue that was, part of one of the glues that was holding them all together then and still obviously now. So yeah,
yeah, that
that's because I
that
What a
knew
fan
wild
base
ride.
was great.
we didn't need all the Stargate fans to be gamers, but we wanted to find gamers who were
Among the
already
Stargate
Stargate
fans,
fans. That
that's
was
right.
really important to me too, because otherwise you have fans coming in saying, well, you should do this or there should be more of this. And we really wanted to Chris was uh
Bullish.
so amazing with the story
He
Yes,
being
wanted
the
it to be
driving
correct.
force. Because I mean, I can go into WoW all day. and kill 10 cats and get some pretty gear, and then kill 20 cats and then get more pretty gear. But and there is excellent lore in Warcraft. I'm not saying there isn't, but the story in Stargate Worlds was just going to drive everything. It's what made the art so incredible to see when you knew the backstory and when you knew,
That's right.
why things were the way they were, all the character art, everything. And I love when Chris talked about the art driving the story and driving the characteristics of the races as well. When he'd see it and he'd be like, oh, well, this is their raison d'etre sometimes, just from having seen what was coming out of the art department.
There was such wonderful collaboration on that project. Speaking about Chris, where Chris appreciated that I recognized that design, that creative needed to drive the development of the game, right? Because it was story. That's what was going to make the game great, was the story. And that it was our job in the art department to honor what was being done by the creative team. And we had the good fortune of working with someone like Chris and with Steve and Sean and that whole team, where they were so responsive to what the art department was doing. And that sometimes the art would sculpt what creative was doing. But more often than not, it was creative that was directing what we were doing, and making sure that that in turn was going to be right for the fans of Stargate, that it was going to add to the story, that it was going to add to the development of the world in a cohesive and satisfying way. But I never felt like I was taking a back seat to creative. I always felt like it was such a good partnership. And I would say the same thing with engineering. Demetrius was always wanting to do what he could to support the efforts of the art department. And when I first got to Stargate, this is just one instance, and I went to then the technical lead, and I don't remember who it was, but and I won't say. And I said I would like to have access to vertex colors on the project. Kind of a very kind of rudimentary aspect of 3D environments is you can use vertex colors, and I wanted it so that in the skybox we could create these very smooth and beautiful gradients in the sky without having massive textures on them. And we don't need to get too far into the weeds on it. But he said no. Said we're not doing that. And I was
just the mind shutting. You can hear the mind going.
Right. It was like closed, and there was nothing I could really do about it.
Wow.
And then Demetrius came, and I thought, I'm going to ask about it again. And go over to Demetrius' office, and he's, working away, sip of Starbucks. Demetrius, can we do vertex colors? Yeah. And that was it. He's like, yeah, work that in. And then we had access to it. And I always felt that great support from the engineering team as well. Once he took the reins.
Yeah. Every team just all feathered in so nicely.
It really did.
Yeah.
I've been really looking forward to talking with you about this guy.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
Tell me about Ra.
There were a lot of characters where, as the art director, I knew that I wanted to do everything. And that's just my nature on these projects. I get excited about it, and I'm like, ooh, I want to do that. I want to do this. But obviously that isn't practical. And the project would have suffered for it as well if I had hogged all of the things to do. But Ra, I was like, okay, I need to work on Ra. And I just had a blast working on this character, imagining, design a god, right? Design this incredible, important, one of the oldest Earth deities from mythology, powerful influence among other mythologies, and come in and do this character. And so one of the important things was to define what the silhouette was going to look like. And so that's what we're looking at here. And we would design these external silhouettes. And this came from Eric's influence on the project of working out these silhouettes. And so I would work on what is the shape of Ra going to look like, because we wanted to know that we could recognize him even if he wasn't, even if we couldn't see the color and texture, that the character would recognize Ra immediately in the game once they knew what he looked like. So we would do all of these silhouette studies, and then we would take him among the art department and talk about him. And then we would take them to creative and get that input from them. And then once we had, discerned what the appropriate silhouette was, then we would flesh it out. So this was kind of the first step in the process of developing that character.
That's amazing.
Magnificent.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I know what I would choose. Everybody would kind of bring their own experience with
their personality
Ra to it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun. Right. Do you have the finished rendering of him?
We're getting to him.
Okay. Nice. Don't jump ahead
Spoilers.
too much. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. This,
Light
being the
dark.
sun
Look at
god, that was always important to have that, the illuminated background behind him that evoked that, and giving him, not turning him into a half animal, half man kind of deity, which you see with Jaffa, you see a lot of Egyptian mythology, but conveying that through the silhouette, kind of having that sense of the snake heads, the tentacles, having those forms so that it confused his human form, that made him feel more than human, which was appropriate for, a deity, important for Ra. So a lot of those considerations came into play, kind of the scaly nature of some of his costuming as well.
Yeah, and anybody who had come from the film into the series, and not seen him since, would just be immediately sucked right back into that moment where, I mean, he's the whole second half of the film, and he's just, man, oh man. Yeah, it just pulls you right back into that any feeling you had when you saw Stargate for the first time. If it was the film, this would evoke all of that.
And trying to create something that is both intimidating and terrifying, but beautiful, that you would kind of couldn't look away, but also do so with some real humility out of fear.
It's like sunshine, it's like the sun is both the film. It's like the sun is God. It's a metaphor for God. It is both beautiful and completely destructive.
Yeah, right.
I loved that about the show, and I was going to love this about the game, that I loved how it explained and yet somehow also honored every god that we can have, not just on our planet, but any planet where there's anybody being worshipped that could have originated from a Stargate, whether it was for good or bad or whatever, you could still get into all of these. And, the ancient Egyptians obviously was amazing, but we also had, Loki and Odin, and like you had every religion that you could investigate, and I just think revel in it a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word, but just really kind of sink your teeth into what makes them so, what makes us fear them, what makes us love them, what makes us reverential, all those things.
Kill for
I love
them.
that.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite things about the Stargate universe, is it provides this explanation of our mythologies, and does so in a very satisfying way. I really love that. It's one of the things that captured my imagination from the very first movie. And I love how that got developed out in SG1 and where we were going with it in Stargate Worlds. Because the mythologies are powerful and they come from somewhere. They come from human experience
it could be
and
more true
imagination.
than we even know. It could be
right.
It could be so accurate.
Right. They are rooted in both the desire of humanity to explain natural phenomena. You read Ovid's Metamorphoses and all of the great stories that are there. And so there's roots that are identifiable, but then there's these aspects of this pantheon of gods from Norse mythology and Babylonian and Egyptian and Greek that have these similar ties that come together that you can't help but let your imagination kind of leap forward, and Stargate does that in such a satisfying way.
But it also would explain any technological leaps in advancement for the time, or where, but also the disappearances of some of these ancient civilizations that we've supposedly had, right? That just vanished. Where did they go? Walking through a Stargate would make a lot of sense.
Yes.
Deep inside of the earth, or at the bottom of the ocean, or under it. There's so much history that is lost.
Antarctica.
You got to know what's So for sure, it's a
I'm
jungle.
on
It's
board.
just having a cold spell.
Yeah.
I have to call out the cross section here, because
I was hoping you would.
So whose idea was it to have some fun here? Honestly,
just like a little slab of meat with the bone and bone marrow exposed.
Right, as if he was literally cut open.
We're like, dissect raw to produce that. I think I have to give credit to Eric on that. I think he did it on one of the concepts or something.
Clever.
Like that. Oh, that's too fun. So I'm going to put it in there. I think that's where that came from, was Eric. I don't remember doing that myself. Maybe it was, but I'll give Eric credit for that.
The Straegis was our big bad. The other one. The big reveal, 99% certain, was that we were going to hold off, that they were furling until the game was released and people had a chance to play it and find out for themselves. Tell me about. You were saying,
and that
pretty sure, because that was I remember it being
going to be one of the things.
There was no word spoken about that.
Right. That was in the vault. Yeah.
Yeah, but tell me about creating these guys. I want to insert before we really get into it that crystal technology is very much a part of the Stargate lore, and these things are crystal based, and crystals are grown. Tell me about what you remember about the Straegis.
Some of the things that we were tasked with is that while they would have some elements of kind of a humanoid figure, you can see a head, torso, and arms, but they weren't going to animate in a human way. And, they could do things like turn 180 degrees by just flipping their elements. They didn't have to remain intact.
Each piece would turn around
as a body. Yeah, the pieces could just turn around and they could separate and come back together. And the hope is that when they animated, that there would be these just kind of little pieces orbiting each other that were coalesced around this central torso and head, and feel very like the most alien of any of the creatures that we were going to have in the game, because you couldn't really even tell how they were held together. What are these forces that are allowing them to levitate and have all of these chunks that were kind of held together by these forces? And Eric did some beautiful concepts on it. I did a little bit of work on this race as well. And then the animation team really did some beautiful work on bringing that vision to life. So this was our most alien of all of the creatures, for sure. So, yeah, great work by Eric on this. I love it. It looks like Deadpool down there in the foreground or something.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I
great.
love
Look
that
at
palette.
the menace in that thing. Yeah. All different kinds of energy fields, and God knows what's going on.
Yeah, they look like they're this, like you said, kind of this crystal biology that they were based on and then kind of held together by these forces, but then they were just kind of spewing out this colorful clouds of smoke that was
Like an
emanating from them,
exhaust.
Yeah, that
But
it
they
just
also
almost
had help
kind of,
with tech, like with plating and, other
yeah,
kind of, I don't know. It seems to evoke like magnetism and
Yeah. This is their
yeah.
backside.
And kind of, they were like polluting at the same time, like in the
yeah,
space that they were in, just spewing out whatever this force was that was
yeah.
keeping them alive and together.
That's very cool.
Yeah, some very cool designs in there. When I, as they were being developed, I was just imagining, you pull out your P90 and you're facing a Straegis and you shoot at it, and
Nothing
most of the
happened.
bullets just go right through it,
Yeah.
because there's all of that empty space, between its parts, and the rest
true.
is this.
And they don't even blink.
Yeah,
Yeah,
don't
you'd
even
have to
blink.
load a lot of ammunition into it to even get any kind of a hit count. And even with if you hit it, I mean,
Right.
you're gonna hurt it.
Right.
So
Yeah, very cool characters, very
Jeez.
It's either
menacing.
passing through or bouncing off.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you shoot at smoke, right?
Right. Yeah, that
So-
last one, I love the different, the how colorful they are, but at the same time, just dark and menacing.
Yeah.
Well,
This is where
wanna
Lost
talk about
got its
dark and
idea for
menacing.
the
smoke
got its
monster?
idea for
Yeah.
the smoke monster from this, right?
That's it. When Christopher came, I'm pretty sure Christopher came up with the name Straegis. And one of the things that I remember distinctly, I just want to go on record here, is when he went up to Vancouver, Brad and Rob were trying to figure out just how committed he was to the word Straegis. It's one of the things, Katie, you and I didn't ask him about specifically in terms of the origins of that name. Hopefully we'll have him back and ask that. But Brad and Rob were very much like, we've never done the Titans. How about you call them the Titan? Maybe these are the Titans. And I remember him considering it. And that's I wasn't long for Stargate Worlds after that, but they could easily have been the Titans.
interesting. Yeah. I think if we had gone with the Titans, thinking of the Titans from Greek mythology,
Mm-hmm.
I would have wanted to push them into a very different visual realm. Because there's some great descriptions of the Titans from Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Whereas these, I feel like with a new word like that, with this new race and new look, it did allow us to explore things without any baggage. We didn't
force you into an aesthetic.
Yeah. And it's not right. That these couldn't have been the Titans. I think I would have pushed back, from, well, that's not what the Titans would be like.
Right.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But they certainly could have been the Titans.
One of the few characters that is mentioned by name in the story beats, is Queen Anat.
Yeah.
This is her here. I always remember. I mean, what an intimidating face! Look at that.
Yeah. Look at those crazy eyes, and it looks like, almost like tears, black tears running out from.
Yes, exactly. She's ugly crying.
Yeah,
but it's
or enraged.
It's so very reminiscent of Stargate. Lore, like all of it. Wow.
And look at the motion that Eric had in this, static concept. Even her hair just has like a flip to it. We caught her mid stride with the wind blowing, and
don't mess with her.
Literally levitating. No, I wouldn't
get out of her way.
When you zoom in on this, I think one of the strengths that Eric had as a concept artist on this game was he never did more work than was needed to convey the information that was going to be needed to create the textures and the models.
It's very Chanel of him.
Yeah, and then would just move right on. My comparison would be like to Sargent, to John Singer Sargent, the incredible portrait artist. One of Sargent's, the aspects that made him so brilliant was how he simplified information. He would paint hair of someone, and maybe it's done with two values and very large brushwork on it, but it was enough. You knew it was hair. You knew it was the shape. And Eric has that great ability too of condensing the detail where it needed to be, and then creating big, beautiful shapes. And that's enough.
Is the information being conveyed?
Yeah.
If it's conveyed, you move on.
Yeah. A lot of great brushwork in there.
Oh man, look at that guy.
Yeah, very
Okay,
cool
wait.
characters.
This
experimental android.
I was going to say this is an android, but it's meant to be. He's not a helper.
Oh no. Well, he's helping himself to some weaponry.
Right?
Was this
for sure.
Like Gould Tech? I don't remember for sure.
I believe so.
And the reason that I'm inclined to think that it could be related to the Asgard as well, right? Because look at the head of that kind of drone.
Yes, but it's very menacing.
Stolen tech, maybe.
Maybe so.
Possibly, yeah, and messed with. Like Anubis had taken the Asgard technology too. It's very possible that it has an Asgard root. But yeah, this is definitely sinister.
Well, you look at
that gun for crying out loud. Jeez.
I know the gun's amazing. You look at some of the like the articulated armor there, and it calls back to that earlier concept we saw, one of the gold that we were talking about on the arm pieces. Has a similar visual vocabulary, and given that Eric did it, that wasn't an accident. So I'm trying to remember how those two tied together.
Apheltes. This is cool.
Oh yeah,
got a couple of kids in here, Blix and Apheltes. I don't remember Blix's story, but
yeah, that would great design. Look at that belt.
Yep,
that's cool. It's like has a little square cartouches on there.
Yeah.
You know what? If for those out there, if you're in game design and you're looking at this, we were just throwing so many ideas at the wall, under the direction of the creative department and getting all of this out there. But I think that there can be a tendency to overwork concepts. One of the things that we did that I felt like sped things up a lot is we created these base templates of each of the races, the male and female of each of the races. And then as we do concepts, everyone worked over the top of the same template. And rather than like reinvent the base figure every time in every concept, which I see done too often in video game development, we did the same thing with the textures. We would create for Tollana, we would create a set of base textures. Here's the concrete for the world. Here's the stone for the world. Here's the grass for the world. And then whenever an artist was tasked to do something, create a new building asset or whatever, they had this pool of textures that they could take and apply to it. And it did a couple things. It sped up the process, but it also created a harmony in the color and the look of the world. That's to have everyone using kind of foundation assets to build from to do the rest of the game. That's not particularly groundbreaking. There are other development places that do that, but I'm always surprised how many development houses don't do that. And then you get 20 different kinds of concrete in a game. You get, tree bark that is a different color temperature from one tree to the next that doesn't really make sense with the color harmony of the world and the ambient light in the world. And that's something that the team bought into early on. And it helped us immensely as we got down the road of making things look cohesive. So it was a very valuable thing to do. If I ever did get back into games, it would be something that I would make sure that I did from day one.
Absolutely. I want to take a quick pass at the Jaffa. One of the things that was definitely going to be different about this game was the look of the Jaffa compared to the other size, compared to a typical human. They were going to be almost 3 times the size. Like a person would come up to about, I don't know, his pinky here.
Yeah, these are
And
400 or
it was just
500 pounds.
it was just a design distinction that I think it didn't take long for me to buy into that, because it's like, okay, that's clearly a Jaffa.
Yeah.
And then we move on, because we can do stuff with the game that the show could not do. And I really embraced that as a fan. I thought that was going to be a really cool direction to go.
The Jaffa were so fun because, to me, I think back to the movie and seeing the
Well, there are no Jaffa in the movie specifically, but yes.
Well, sure. But basing it on that kind of design,
right.
seeing that headdress peel back, go forward. Yep. And when I first came into working on Stargate Worlds, that was like from day one, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see this. I can't wait to see the articulated armor, kind of form and develop. And so getting to work on these characters tied me back into the original movie.
Mr. T fan.
The Mr. T chain. Yeah.
That's hilarious. That obviously had to have been a fun joke.
Oh, this is one of the earliest character concepts
so beautiful.
we showed.
Beautiful design by Eric, and this is what Irene took and did the 3D sculpture of. So what a great design that is.
Man.
Yeah, again, very early on in the development. Such an intimidating, you look at the pictographs, the hieroglyphs, the Egyptian art, and you see the gods that are half creature and half human, and they exist in their space and are kind of almost quaint when they're drawn in that Egyptian style that we're used to. But then when you stand in the game and they put on that headdress and they become 9 feet tall, extremely intimidating and terrifying in the game. And then, in this concept, seeing other cultures taking, what if we had Mayan roots? What if we had Aztec roots and Nordic roots, behind some of the creatures? That I love seeing the designs, the variations here.
Tier 1, you got to start off somewhere, and something very recognizable.
That's right.
Yep. And keeping, again, like we said, keeping kind of the same amount of exposure between the male and female armor sets.
That's right.
Not falling into that trap.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Very cool designs. Stargate just offered such a rich opportunity for artists to explore it, and in the game, having that latitude with Brad's blessing to expand the vocabulary that we were pulling from.
That's right. He was all on board for it. He trusted Chris. He trusted you, and
deservedly so.
That's right.
Just a very nice man.
Just goes on and on, man.
We're looking at things that are 20 years old, and think of the tech think of how far we've come in that, in that amount of time to be doing this quality and caliber, and it holds up. It's incredible. It's really incredible.
The idea of being able to develop this world with tools like Unreal 5.
Right?
Oh my gosh. With nanite technology in the Unreal Engine, and just essentially unlimited polygons in the environment. And someone needs to do this. Someone needs to
we've been saying it all along.
Develop this game. Go. It's the ultimate foundation for an MMO.
Let's go.
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
I love it.
Are you looking forward to the next Stargate series?
So much.
We need to have a watch party.
I love that. I became a big fan. Obviously, I was a fan of SG-1 before I worked on the game, and then was a fan of Atlantis. And then I felt like Universe lost a little bit of it for me. And
Okay.
Yeah.
there was a joy and an optimism in the other series that I felt like it didn't have in Universe. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with the new series. I hope that it captures that again, where it's like, even with all the wars and challenges and destruction and intrigue and politics of the Stargate universe and the Stargate world, that there was always this sense of, humanity is moving forward and is going to do wonderful things. So
Hope. There was always hope.
yeah,
That's
that's
right.
right.
Even in the
Yeah,
darkness, at the edge of the universe, eventually.
Yeah, I feel like
Oh.
you do, that SGU got a little bit away from that. And, I've talked to David about it before, that just, it didn't resonate nearly the same way that SG1 and Atlantis did. So, or that the game would have. And so I'm really keen to see what they're going to do with the next
I
one.
love it. Yeah. Is there a time frame?
I suspect we will be, they're beginning filming in the fall. So
Amazing.
Nice.
they're still in production now. I'm hopeful maybe December 28, December 27,
27.
January 28, somewhere around there.
Has there
And
been
what's-
casting? Oh, sorry, Katie.
No, I was
Nothing
gonna say,
yet.
do we know
Nothing
the
yet. But I
title?
suspect we'll be hearing. I'm not positive, so I
Incredible.
wouldn't be surprised if they just go with Stargate. But it's the fourth iteration, so you want to bring in, expand the tent as much as you can.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make it
we're all here
don't make
for
it
it.
seem like you have to pick up the old ones. Make it seem like the old ones that came before are not
Right.
required reading, but are now like, oh, I want to check this out because this interests me. What have I missed?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Katie, were you on the Midway for that? For the
Yes.
screening and the party?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. What a cool experience that was. And David,
Yeah,
I'm so
amazing.
happy that you were there as well.
It was good to see
Yeah.
you. Yeah,
that
was a good
was
night.
that was a
That
really
was a
fun
great
night.
night.
Yeah, seeing it projected up on the screen, seeing Christopher Judge looking up at it and just being like, this is incredible, because it was kind of like opened a lot of people's eyes to hear the music, hear Nick's music, to see the visuals and realize
was
the
the
potential
prompt
that it had.
to get everyone into their seats. And so you kind of
Uh-huh.
had 2/3 of the people in their seats, and then there was still a third trickling in, and then you heard the pop, 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 and you just were like, everybody who wasn't already kind of, ready to get seated, it made them all turn and look and move.
Great way
That
to
was
start.
such a proud moment. Oh my gosh, we
Yeah.
were all so
That was
incredibly
great.
incredibly proud. That really made us all feel as a team that we were part of the
Mhm.
Stargate family.
100%. Yeah,
That
they
crossover
really
was
were great.
really fun. Yeah, really
Howard,
exciting.
this has been great to see you, and because we see each other at cons every now and then, but to finally sit down and say, okay, now we're going to catch up. Now we're
Yeah.
going to hear that story. This was a blessing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Loved it. Thank you for
was
having me
awesome.
on. Love chatting with you both. I consider you both great friends, and after all of this time, to be able to, pull some things out of the recesses of my brain and remember, and all these beautiful positive things, the people that I got to work with, and yeah, really wonderful. So thank you very much.
I love him so.
Howard's amazing. Just a wealth of resources, this guy.
But so he has more talent in the fingernail on his pinky than everyone I think I've ever met in my entire life. Like, but so humble and so lovely
That's
and
right.
generous and giving.
He's just so natural.
But
It
so
just comes
talented.
forth out of him. It's just so instinctual. I would sit his fine art. I'm gonna do a brief montage of his art
know.
here because it's just nuts. We didn't
blows
talk
your
at
mind.
all about his fine art. There's no time. The
But
classes that he's taught, and man,
do you remember when you realized who he was? Like, he was the art director, and he came on to be on the team, and he was doing all this incredible stuff. But then, do you remember the moment somebody kind of whispered to you, you know who Howard Lyon actually is? And we had the internet at that time, so we could look it up.
started
and
poking
we were like,
around.
oh, holy
I would go
Dinah.
to bookstores in the area and see his
Mm-hmm.
art for sale. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, wow, I get it.
Yeah, wow.
Like this guy,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's painted in churches and everything else, and he's created stuff for Magic the Gathering. This
It's
juxtaposition
Magic the
is just
Gathering
he
stuff.
does anything. He's just crazy. So
That's how
absolutely, we
I
were
got my
so
kids
lucky.
to be impressed is I whipped out a couple of his cards and went, I know the guy that drew these. They were like, you do? Yeah, he works down the hall. Oh man.
Katie,
Yeah, that
these are
was fun.
continuing
That
to be a
was really
treat.
fun. Yeah.
I am so thankful to have you on this journey, and
Oh, I love you.
I love you. Let's do more.
Okay, let's do it.
Those folks are awesome. I'm so thrilled to be able to bring this content to you guys week after week. My name is David Reed. You're watching the Stargate Oral History Project. If you like Stargate and you want to see more, click that like button. It does help with the show's growth. Please also consider sharing the video with a Stargate friend. And if you want to get notified about future episodes, click subscribe. My Patreons, you guys are just amazing. I am the best example of, well, hubris, and then deciding that, you know what, I'm going to go and ask for help, and then being affirmed in that help to the point where, you knucklehead, let us help lift you up, is basically the message that I have gotten. So thanks to all of you who have provided that to me. It means so much to have every single one of you on board so that I can bring this project to you week after week. We've got a number of shows continuing to head your way while I am AFK. And hopefully I'll have some recorded content for you when I come back. There's a lot in the hopper right now. DialTheGate.com has the complete schedule while I'm gone, so be sure to check it out. My name is David Reed for Dial the Gate. I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, I'm Howard Lyon, and I'm the art director on Stargate Worlds.
Dan Elgren contacted me about, I guess it was about a year ago, and asked me to do some background concepts for the game. And at that time, I was working as a freelance illustrator.
I've known Howard for 10 years, and we've worked together at a bunch of different studios. We even had a studio of our own for a little while there. That was good times.
And I did a poster, painted the poster for Stargate Worlds for some marketing stuff, and then I painted an interior. And then they asked me to do a 3D object. And at that point, Dan Elgren asked me to come in and asked me if I would be interested in taking a position at Cheyenne Mountain.
His sense of color is just spot on. It's amazing. And, that's like what I love about his stuff the most is like how the colors play off each other and how the saturation is just really intense and all that kind of stuff. So.
He's a native to Arizona, and I'm not. So I moved here, and they have scorpions here, and my kids love to hunt scorpions, but we hadn't really figured out a good way to do so. And Howard recommended this cool flashlight that you can get that has 3 different settings of basically black light. So now that we have that, armed with that, we're able to mimic what Howard does regularly, which is each evening go out with the black light and watch these scorpions glow and then smash them with sticks. If it wasn't for Howard, we'd probably still be, just banging around in the dark.
He loves babies and brushes his teeth regularly, and in the time that I've known him, he's never once killed a man. So. No, never.
One of my favorite things about Stargate is that each gate that you go through is a completely different world. It may be that you go through a gate and it's a very high-tech, sci-fi, out there, 1,000 years from our own technology, or it could be that you go into a very medieval village where they have a cathedral and half-timber homes, or a completely different, completely alien world from anything that we're used to. So artistically, really there are no limits as to what you can do and what you can introduce into the Stargate world. Most of the time that I spend here, I try and spend it painting and concepting. I find that as an art director, that the easiest way to direct is to actually provide an example. I don't always get the chance to do that for meetings and scheduling and organization, but most of the time that's what I try and do. When I'm not doing that, where I can, I'll offer input and help to members of the team. Fortunately, we have a very talented team, and I don't often have to leave my desk to give feedback, because things go pretty smooth from the get-go.
It's like frozen and covered in snow, so he's going to be like half buried in the snow.
I guess with any group of artists, a lot of times you're going to have visions that differ. And it's my job to try and make it look like the game was done by one artist. And I think that's the most challenging part of the job, is trying to figure out how to let individuals grow in their artistic development, and to really encourage that, but at the same time trying to apply a singular vision to the game, for the visuals. You wonder a little bit, am I just imposing my personal opinion, or am I doing what's best for the game? And I always try and do what's best for the game. I would think of them more like, these are more like, eagle wings, but I would think more like dragonfly wings. They'd be really delicate, and
you can see light. And it's like man-made wings instead of like found wings.
A game development cycle is a lot like working on a painting, where you start out with a lot of times a written description of kind of what you want for the illustration, and then you do a concept for it. In games, you have the game design document, and then you have a concepting round. And there's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement right at that first stage, and then you're deciding the colors and the look and the feel, and the whole middle part of the process, both on a painting and game development, is really, it's kind of the meticulous part of game development. The meticulous and sometimes tedious part of doing a painting, where you've painted the first few bricks, and that was fun, deciding what they were going to look like, and now you have 1,000 more to paint, to finish up the painting. What I'm looking forward to most is after we exit that part of the process, is where you get to tweak and you get to polish and you get to, that last 10% really brings up the quality of the game and the look of the game. And I always look forward to anticipate that part of development, whether it be in a painting or whether it be in game development.
He brings experience and efficiency, but also just an amazing look, and sort of that potential for a really, really classic looking game.
I always find myself growing because I get to know people a little bit better. I interacting with people, and I really enjoy working with people. I find the people that I work with here fascinating and fun, and so I've always found that when I come out of an experience or an opportunity like this, that's where I have a lot of growth. In other areas, artistically, because of the variety of worlds that Stargate provides, it provides a lot of opportunity for artistic growth where I am given the opportunity to really push myself and do things that I might not normally have painted, I might not normally have thought of to work on.